There we go. Perfect. So thank you everyone for joining us today on this Getting Comfortable with the Uncomfortable session with Igbo. My name's Caitlin. I work in contact centres and I will try and be your hostess with the mostest today. This event has been recorded. It's for anyone who misses it to watch back. Please make use of the chat functionality to ask questions throughout. Please, this is a safe space, so do be mindful of that, and any questions that we don't get to, we will try and circle back round for you. So Igbo, I'll pass over to you. Want to give us a bit of an introduction to yourself for those of you, people who don't know you?
Yeah, so my name's Hugo. I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay. I'm coming over all right, Caitlin? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, yep. So I've been in the bank for 8 years. I started off with the credit card team when we were launching the credit card back in 2014-15. And more recently, in the last year, I moved across to digital engineering within the sort of digital innovation org. And I have been co-chair for the Embrace Network, which is our ethnicity network now, for about 5 to 6 years. And yeah, I enjoy what I do. I try my hardest. I don't always get it right, but you know, we live and learn.
Perfect. So we're here today to talk about your journey, Igbo, that you've been on since Black Lives Matter. So 2020 saw a huge social media surge on Black Lives Matter. At that time, how did that make you feel?
Oh yeah, gosh. So I've always been involved in certain levels of understanding my kind of heritage and culture. I grew up in a family where I was fostered. My family were white, and I talked about this a little bit in my when we did a previous series around this kind of conversation. And I had always been aware of some of this rough treatment that Black people get under the system and the society, and that we've kind of brought up with. And you just learn to get on with it. You just learn to pull your bootstraps up and just deal with it, and just, you know, it is what it is. Crack on, get yourself out of the ghetto, and just kind of live that way. When 2020 came, and you know, it was exacerbated because we were all at home, and there was a great global pandemic happening. So everything was all emotions were heightened anyway. But there was just something about that movement and that moment that touched me in a way that it had never done before. Now, my kids don't really ever see me cry. I try to when there's moments, so that they don't feel like crying's a bad thing, but I'm not really a crier. But throughout 2020, I'd never cried as much as I did. Watching my little 4-year-old watch me cry, and she's just then bursting into tears as well, because just seeing so many people, I cry for both reasons. I cry for those that were supporting the moment, who weren't Black, who were like, yeah, no, Black lives do matter, and they haven't for a long, long time, and it's now time for them to do so. That was a lot, and even now, just thinking about it, you know, I choke up a little bit. But then there was the other side, the flip side, to see so much hate for Black people just saying, look, we just want to have an equal chance, just have an equitable opportunity just to be who we are. We are made to be special as well. And we're not, the society isn't allowing us to do that. So it was a very emotional time. I cried a lot. It impacted my family a lot. They had to kind of really get to grips with what was this about. They go to quite a multicultural school, my kids. So it was really good for them because the conversation could flow really well. But one of the things I think I walk away with from that time that's quite a hurt on me is that I lost a lot of friends actually during that time. And some of it was my choice, some of it was their choices. But actually, when I've got friends who I thought I knew well, making comments about Black Lives Matter and about Black people, and just talking as this homogenous generic concept that we are, like we don't have our own individualities, and talking about that homogenous generic concept in such a negative and derogatory way was just a lot for me. And I was like, I thought better of you. And yeah, I just found myself losing a lot of friends. Some I'd call out on it and say, have you actually thought that you have a Black friend and the way you're talking is not okay? And the blindness and the ignorance was just sometimes too much. So I did lose quite a lot of friends for that. And then there was the pressure in work, because I was a chair of a network and black. So actually, what were we as an organisation going to do? I did feel a bit of a heavy weight and a burden. And thankfully, I had people like Tony and Shaheda and other members of the committee, and then yourself coming on along, Caitlin, that helped to carry that burden. But I did feel quite pressure. So it was a tough year, a really tough year.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Ugo, and being so vulnerable there and, your own experience. Do you think personally that, anything's changed following the Black Lives Matter movement?
It's really funny because I do see a lot of people. I remember at the time, and I hear it now. I remember some people saying, "No, nothing's going to change. It's just the same old. We've been talking about this for years. People are still going to be ignorant. People are still going to change." And I was like, "No, things are going to be different this year. I fully believe it." I got to the end of 2021, and I remember when the government did their findings, when they did the investigation, and they were like, "Okay, there's no such thing as systemic racism." And I remember being quite floored by that and thinking, wow, we've done all this. This moment has been something different. This moment has been something more powerful. And at the end of it, you've turned around and said, yeah, it's a bit like gaslighting, isn't it? Everything you think is going on is not happening. There's nothing to see here. Carry on, get on with it. Go back to where you were, pull your bootstraps up, get yourself out of the ghetto. That's how it felt. And I was quite disheartened by that, because then I started to think, wow, we did all of that, and actually nothing has or is going to change. One of the things that's really touched me, and I did a bit of a reflection towards the end of the year, was actually looking at some of my friends that I did still have, not the ones that I'd gone from, but the friends I did still have on Facebook, and seeing the changes they were making in their own spheres of influence, watching my friends who are teachers, who are bringing in their own parts of the curriculum to teach a different Black history, to change the narrative on things that they could own, watching people who work in, I don't know, the parking industry or work in the museum industry, just making their own personal changes. They were kind of like, do you know what, we don't care what you say, government. We know there's a problem and we're going to do something about it, whether it be sport, whether it be business, whatever it was. I just watched change actually happening. And that was the biggest thing for me, was seeing individuals take the ownership and the responsibility to go, I'm going to do something in my area of influence. I'm not just going to put a black square or a black fist up. I'm not just going to say, yeah, I stand behind this. I'm actively going to do something, a verb, a doing concept, and actually seeing those things come in place. And you know what else? I've actually really enjoyed watching lots more Black people on TV. Seeing adverts with Black people in. I know everyone, like, I remember watching a Christmas advert, I think it was 2020, it might be 2021, and someone was like kicking off because there was a Black family in a, I don't know, Tesco advert, it might have been something like that. And they were like, oh, I just can't identify with this family. It doesn't represent me. And someone's like, but you're all right with the carrot family and you're okay with the sprout family. But when it comes to the Black family, it's a bit of a problem. But so that just did make me laugh. But it was just seeing so many more organizations in the sort of advertising space using Black people in their advertising. And it's only when I started to see it a lot that I realized that how much it hadn't been there in the past. And that really shocked me. I was like, wow. We've never been represented like this. So I've actually enjoyed seeing that. And I know you can call it a bit tokenism now, but actually as a Black person, seeing that, I actually felt quite appreciative of it. So yeah, I do think things have changed, and I think they will continue to change.
Definitely. Thanks for that, Ugo. And I totally agree that, representation is so important. And we've seen that recently as well with the Halle Bailey being cast as Ariel in the new live action make of that, and maybe the negativity that we've seen around it on social media, but also the great positive response in the videos we've seen as well. They've warmed my heart over the course of it being announced, so it's so important.
Watching little Black girls look at the Little Mermaid and just getting a smile of joy on their face. That, I mean, having a little Black girl myself, that makes me, well, having two actually, that makes me really like, wow. So yeah, 100% agree, 100% agree.
So since the Black Lives Matter movement, you have been on a journey of self-discovery, we'll call it. How has that been for you?
Wow. It's been a long road. It's been exciting. It's been frustrating. Anyone that knows me, I'm quite methodical in the things I do. I'm a strategy person by design, and everything I do has a strategic approach to it. Whether it's the touchy-feely things, whether it's the analytical things, whatever it is, right? That's how I am. And I was very the same with this. So when Black Lives Matter kind of come on, like I said, a lot of emotion stirred in me. And I started to just think about my own sort of history and kind of wanting to know a bit more about my own Black history. And, you know, the joys of working from home is that you can stick headphones in and listen to loads and loads of things that you maybe couldn't do in the office because you like to talk more with people, right? So I just had an actual bit of an opportunity to learn and go on that bit of a journey of understanding my history more. And that drew me to my culture. So I don't know if you can see it, I'm wearing a t-shirt that says Igbo, which is my culture, and my surname derives from that. So Igbo with an E is how my surname is spelled, but it derives from the Igbo tribe and the culture that's kind of attributed to that. And it's funny because my mum has always said to me, she's always wanted me to be more in touch with my culture, whereas me, I've always been like, well, I'm born in England, I'm English, you know, da 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 da. 2020 came along and I started to question that. I started to question, am I English? Because let's take the Euros, for example, right? I can feed your children, but because I miss a penalty, I'm then questioning about my place in this country. And that's how a lot of Black people felt. So Marcus Rashford was a symbol of that. But a lot of Black people throughout 2020 and 21 started to question, is England home? Is Britain home for me? Is this where I'm at home? But anyway, cutting all that aside, I saw my mum was loving it because I was spending more time learning about my culture, my Igbo culture. And just to share a little bit about myself, I'm a Christian. I always have been from very young. I've been brought up in the church, bit of Catholic, bit of Christian, and then kind of from about sort of like pre-teens into teens, I kind of just carried on that journey myself, with aging parents and stuff like that. And I'd always had my faith was here and my culture was here. They're kind of like separated. I never saw the connection. And it was only in 2020 when I started to go on a little bit of a journey a bit deeper into my history. And I started to see something that I just never noticed before. Maybe because I hadn't been really focused. Maybe I got quite bored of listening to my mum's Igbo music and listening to her tell me about this and that and be like, oh yeah, whatever. But I'd actually started to pick up on certain things that I was like, I'd see it in my culture here and I'd see it in my faith here. And I'd be like, well, that's the real similarity here. There's a similarity here. There's something here. And I started to see the synergies between the Igbo culture and a lot of the stuff that was happening in the time of the Bible, especially specifically before Jesus' time, but even then actually from Jesus' time as well, when you read the Old and the New Testament. And I mean, cutting a long story short, over that kind of couple of years, I found my faith and culture to stop being these two separate things, and they became super like intertwined. And I was like, there's something here that isn't making sense to me, but at the same time is making sense to me. There's something here that tells you that my faith and my culture are one and the same, but I don't know what it is, and I couldn't figure it out. Now, rewind 3 years prior to 2020, I'd taken a DNA test because my sister had always talked to me about, you do know that we are connected to the people in the Bible, and I'd be like, oh, yeah, whatever. You just try and do some Black empowerment. I love you for it, but just chill, you know. So I took my DNA test, thinking it was going to come back with something amazing. It came back saying you are 99% Nigerian. I was like, oh, no shit, Sherlock. I could have told you that. You know what I mean? I could have told you that myself without needing to spend however many pounds on a DNA test. Anyway, 2020 comes along, and suddenly I start to get lots of hits of fourth cousins, fifth cousins, because what Black Lives Matter did, as well as all the change that we've seen that's kind of sometimes a little bit hidden, is it empowered Black people to kind of want to know more about themselves. So I had lots of people who were starting to try and find out their identity, taking DNA tests, and all this stuff, who are now popping up on my DNA as fourth, fifth, sixth cousins. A lot of them are based in America. And it was that kind of realization that, goodness me, I'm actually probably more connected to this journey of the slave trade and everything of that, the kind of slave trade history, than I ever realized. So then I started to dig a bit deeper, and and anyone who wants to do this, I suggest you to do it. It's really brilliant. There's a lot of sort of like Ancestry and Me and 123 Ancestry that are really great at not just identifying your DNA based on today, but also identifying your DNA journey based on archaeological digs that have happened over the centuries, so they can actually match your DNA to the archaeological digs that have happened. And to cut a long story short, my ancestral DNA journey was a complete map and alignment of the Israelite journey that had happened pre-Christ and post-Christ. And then suddenly everything just made sense. I was like, this is why I can see this faith and culture connecting, because actually what I'm seeing here is that my journey is the journey of the Israelites of the Bible, who I've been studying for 30, 40 years and never ever saw the connection. And suddenly DNA was showing me now that connection. It was showing me the connection to the people in America as well. It was just completely opening up a whole sort of world to me. And I guess the final nail in the coffin, if for want of a better phrase, was at the start of 2022, and I'll share the link on here afterwards. The Jewish Rabbinical Court did some tests, did some questionnaires, did some surveys, did all this kind of investigations, and then in February or January of 2022, they came out and confirmed that the Igbos are officially the descendants of the ancient Israelites, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it was just like, boom, 2 years of journey suddenly made 100% sense. And yeah, fascinating. Sorry, I feel like I went off a bit of a tangent there, but hopefully that kind of that's enough.
Not at all, not at all. You told us about your journey, and that's exactly what we were looking to find out. That was such a period of time in your life where you went through all this self-discovery and learning different parts about yourself, your heritage, where you've came from, your culture, your faith, all kind of becoming one. How did you feel when you made the discovery and that kind of light bulb moment where you went, oh, it all kind of makes sense now? And how did that make you feel, Igbo?
Honestly, my first feeling was one of frustration, that I didn't know that. I was nearly 40 years old at the time, and I didn't know that part of my history. I'd had a faith for that long, and I didn't know its connection to actually me as an individual and as a person. So I actually found it like really frustrating, and annoyed that I didn't know that information. I remember speaking to my sister, the same sister that was like, "Oh, we connected." She was just like, "Ah, I told you." And that was great to have that kind of connection, because she'd been talking about it for years and just felt like the black sheep of the family, excuse the pun. And now she had somebody who got it, and because of my methodical kind of nature that I talked about before, I could actually show her the connections and the actual points. So what she touchy-feely felt, here's actually the science and the actual history behind your touchy-feely thing. So yeah, I definitely think my overriding feeling was frustration. It was then a little bit of validation, because it's quite interesting, and I won't go too off topic on this, but it's interesting when you start to connect to yourself as a black person to the Bible and the Israelites in the Bible. It's a bit of a fraught road, because that's not what we're used to, especially in westernized culture, but across the world, even in African culture. The concept that actually when you say to somebody who's an Igbo in Nigeria that you're a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, actually that's like a bit weird to them. So you go down this journey of a little bit like, oh, am I bonkers here? So it was a real validation as well. So it went from like a real mix of anger to a point of, oh, actually I feel quite validated now, because I can stand behind this. And it's hard. I could talk to my kids now about it and talk to them. So when I'm teaching the Bible, I'm bringing it to life for them, because it's their heritage as well. Now it's not just their sort of faith; it's their heritage as well. But it's quite funny when I speak to my parents. My dad's kind of like, and I said to him, I said, "Dad, do you know this stuff?" And I think he said, "It's like, yeah, we do believe that to be the case." I was like, "Oh my life, I've been on this, and you never said that to me." But however, when I spoke to my mom, very different. She's like a lot of black people is just like, no, I don't think that's right. No, it's not, because she's so used to that concept that it doesn't fathom her mind that as black people we could be people in the Bible that are actually spoken about. And like I said, I don't want to go off too much on the topic, but a lot of that comes from colonialism, and these are the kind of the after impacts of colonialism that we don't necessarily see. But we think because the Western world isn't necessarily taking everything from the African nations anymore, that colonialism isn't as powerful as it was. But the mindset that sits there is still huge. I mean, a lot of my cousins and third and fourth cousins that are in Nigeria, they all have an English name, like Charles and George and Simon. If you're going to be living in Nigeria for the whole of your life, why would you need that name? You wouldn't. The reality is they don't foresee them ever being there permanently. They always see a call to the Western world. And it's that kind of mindset. So when I speak to Mama, it just couldn't register at all. So yeah, so a lot of emotions, I guess, is the short answer, but then hopefully the long answer makes sense as well.
Definitely. And you've told us about your Igbo culture, your Christian faith, learning your Israelite and learning that kind of faith and culture, and the Judaism of that. How do these cultures and faiths kind of intertwine, and the main differences between them?
Great question. And this is one of the things that I'm battling, and it is a battle because it's a mental battle. I'm battling through with my mum because we're going on this journey now together to try and understand this, because there's sort of three sort of entities to this. You've got your Judaism, which is a religion that some Jews believe in Jesus, some don't, right? You've then got Christianity, which is very much a Jesus belief, but not necessarily connected to some of the traditions of the Jewish faith. And then you've got this kind of hybrid, which in the Bible times it was called the Way, and it's that kind of hybrid that's like recognizing the cultural backdrop of the Jewish faith, but actually holding tight to the kind of the faith in Jesus. And I see that three-way mix across my culture as well, the Igbo culture. I see that three-way mix of the three. And it's really that kind of, for my faith, it's the Jesus aspect that kind of drives the biggest difference, I think. Because you see a lot of people, like I say, who have the cultures, have the traditions, whether it be celebrating the festivals, whether it be, and hopefully this is PG, circumcision, whether it be whatever it may be, you know, some of the sacrifices, some of that hold to those traditions. And then you've got the other side, which is like, well, okay, since Jesus has come, that's different now, but I still recognize that cultural side. So it's a real ongoing battle, really. And I keep referring to it as a battle because it is complicated. You get people now that, like I say, when I'm having a conversation with my mom, she's saying to me, well, what are you now? Are you Igbo? Are you Israelite? Are you going to start following the Igbo culture? You're going to start, and you know, we're trying to tension that battle through, because I'm like, no, my culture is here. I'm just trying to work out through what it is, how it plays into me as a person, how I pass it on to my children. I don't know if that makes sense to answer this question, because it's a complicated question.
No, it does. It makes perfect sense. And you just spoke about there, mentioned at the end, how that plays in to your life. So how is that playing into your life currently, Hugo, and how do you maybe foresee that playing into your life in the future as you work through that?
Yeah, it's a definite ongoing journey. So this year, for the first time, we celebrated Passover as a wider family. So I got all my family together. And it worked really well, because we've always celebrated Easter. It's always been easy to celebrate Easter, grab some Easter eggs, get the family together, blah blah blah. To then get everyone together for Passover is a bit of an anomaly to my family, because we've never done it before. But luckily, the weekend, it fell on the same weekend as Easter. So I was like, we're getting together for a Passover Easter celebration. And everyone's like, okay, we'll come. And so we all went down to Birmingham, all descended on Birmingham, had a Passover meal, celebrate together. And then I played them some videos, and then I talked to them about the journey I'd been on and the findings that I'd come to and stuff like that. And then we had this really long conversation as a family about it, you know, like some of the stuff I was alluding to before about understanding how does it work, where's it falling through, all that kind of piece. And it was really powerful. It was really good. We've also just, me and my immediate family, so just me and my wife and the kids, we've just celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles. It's in the midst of it now, just coming to the end of it, which is another Jewish festival that is recognized in the Bible. And it's hard, you know, because I'm loving it. I'm loving it. I'm wanting to get more involved in these things, but I'm also conscious that this is alien to my wife, it's alien to my kids, it's alien to my wider family, it's alien to my church as well. When you say to some of my church friends, I'm like, well, yeah, we're going to celebrate Passover. They're like, do you mean Easter? I'm like, no, I mean Passover. And it's like that kind of whole kind of mindset shift. That's it's a little bit complicated to do. So it's definitely a journey. It does drive some difficult conversations. We have a bit of a tension in our household because my wife is a massive lover of Christmas and I've never really loved it. And now I've got all these shiny new festivals that I want to celebrate. I'm like, yeah, get rid of that one. But that's not how life works, right? You try to find that happy balance. And I just remember feeling like when I was speaking to my kids, I can't take away those joyous celebrations and try and bring in these Jewish celebrations that A, I don't really fully understand, and B, I don't really know how to do them properly. So we just go on this journey together as a family, but I think that's probably been the biggest change is in recognizing some of those festivals. What do they mean? What's the backdrop to them? How do you live them out in today's society? How do you celebrate them? Because when I grew up in the faith, it was very much a kind of concept of Jewish festivals seem like a ritual to me as opposed to a celebration. Just because of how I read things, just because of how I've been brought up. A lot of the time, a lot of Christians would say that because that's why they don't do it, because it's just become like a bit of a ritual rather than a celebration post Jesus. So that's why I've never done it. So to revisit that and see them actually as no, their celebration is no different to Thanksgiving, no different to Christmas, no different to getting together, eating food, celebrating and remembering. I just see them in a completely different light now. So that's been the real, probably the biggest change, I think, and that's what's kind of intertwined into my life. And I guess also how I recognize the Sabbath as well, because that's sometimes a little bit different. And A Life More Virgin is great for that.
Thanks, Igor. And you just spoke there about your family and the different holidays, and we spoke a lot about the journey you've been on, but also kind of how you've brought that to life within in your family. What's the kind of impact of that been? How has that felt? Has everybody been different? If we go, your sister's probably like, I told you so, and so everyone's probably felt quite different. But how has that been for you and your family together as a unit?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Like I said, I think there's two angles. There's my immediate family, which is my wife and our three kids, and then there's my wider family. And within my wider family, it's been great. My brother's been very much like, he's all over it, but he's just not very organized. So he's just not quite. He would love to be on the journey with me as passionately as I am and as focused as I am. He's just not great in that kind of space. So he's there. My sister, interestingly enough, even though she was like, I told you, she's actually not as. She'll follow what I say. She'll say, okay, we'll do this and I'll follow you and I'll go. But she's not necessarily as crazy about things as maybe I am being. I had to go through a bit of a, and as you can imagine it, a bit of a sort of a management session of myself where you suddenly find out this truth and you're like, oh, I want to do everything. And it's like, okay, I've got family, I've got kids, and you try and find your sort of minimal balance and get to a more of a happy medium. And I think that's going to be the way a little bit with my sisters and that. My dad is disconnected from the family, so we just tend to have chats about it, which is quite nice. Me and my mum tend to have the more deeper chats, but and it's funny because we'll have a chat and I'll come away from the chat feeling a little bit disheartened because she just hasn't seemed to have got it. And then 2 months later, we'll be talking about something else and she'll mention something about it, I'll be like, oh, okay, you must have got it, you must have understood it, and stuff like that. But yeah, I think the biggest impact's been around my immediate family. And I'll share a little bit about this. I talked earlier about how, as a Black person, talking about your heritage connecting to the Bible it's a bit of a complicated scenario. So then when I'm telling my 2 9-year-olds and 6-year-olds about that same journey and their connection to it, I've actually found myself saying to them, listen, right, don't be going into school and having this big old conversation about how you're descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because actually, A, it might not be as accepted and people might really struggle to understand it. And B, you might find yourself in some very awkward and difficult questions that are hard to kind of get around. That we're still new to this journey. There's some people who've been celebrating the Jewish faith for 20, 30 years and we were doing it for like a year. So, let's, and I find us having to manage that a little bit, which I think is quite sad. No, I don't think it's quite sad. I think it's really sad, right, that we're having to do that. But it's kind of the reality that we're sort of facing into a little bit. I think we've got some friends who are Jewish, and I remember when we told them that we were going to be doing the Passover, my wife was telling them, and no, she told them that we'd just done the Passover. It was just after the Passover, and they were like, and she's like, oh, did you do this? Yeah. What about that? Yeah. What about that? Oh, yeah. And I was like, reeled off this list of things that we should have done to make sure that we'd done the Passover correctly. And, we had done, but it was just really funny because it was like, it blew their mind that we were doing it and that we knew what we were doing, and just the concept that we felt ourselves as a connection to it. It was really crazy. So I think that's been the biggest impact for my immediate family into how we have that conversation. When I say to people, because in the moment, because it's in October in England, it's freezing cold, right? So you can't go and camp outside because it's just too cold. So we've got an indoor tent. So we've got like drapes coming in from the ceiling down to the light, and it's kind of, so when you walk in, it feels like you're inside the tent. And if people come into your house, it's like, well, what the hell are you doing? and it's trying to explain that rationale as to why you're doing it and and then why it's important to you, and some of that stuff. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. It really does, Igbo, definitely. So it is Black History Month, which this is our now fourth Getting Comfortable with Uncomfortable session that we have had. The theme for Black History Month this year is action, not words. And you spoke earlier on about becoming active, and not just when we were talking about Black Lives Matter, and it's not just about putting the black square on social media. It's about being active and driving change, and we can't have diversity without inclusion. So what is something we can do to move into that kind of active ally space, to make Black Jewish people feel more comfortable?
Do you know what, right? It's interesting hearing you call that phrase Black Jewish. I've never been called Black Jewish. And I probably never called myself Black Jewish, and I probably wouldn't. Yep. Which I think is really interesting. I know we've talked a lot in the past about, and when I say we, I mean the kind of, as a bank, we talked a lot about the homogenous concept. Okay, if somebody meets this criteria, I'm just going to assume they're that, and actually there's some intricate differences to them. I still class myself as a Christian. If anyone asks me what my faith is, when I sign the form, when I go into core HR, I'm like, do I put Jew? No, I'm a Christian. I'm still class myself as a Christian, even though my heritage now actually aligns to the Israelites, right? So it's a really interesting one, but I see myself completely as a Christian. And I think that's one of the key points in the answer to your question, is actually recognize people for their individuality. It's still really important. When they go on these self journeys and they identify in a certain way, it's recognizing that individuality between them. One of the things I think is quite interesting, and I probably ask people if they're up for it, just for some digital hands or physical hands if you're on the screen. Has anybody been following what's been happening with Kanye West in the news recently? Digital hands, or as got some hands. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I'll put hands down again, and we'll go for a secondary of hands. Did anyone hear his comments about Black people and the Israelites? Okay, so Kirsty, you did. Kirsty, I don't know if you feel brave enough to just say a couple of things, what you heard and stuff like that. I don't know if you feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah, give me 2 seconds. My flatmate's on the phone, so bear with me whilst I move.
Okay,
I'm on
sorry.
the move. I'm on the move.
Sorry, this is not being recorded. Oh, yeah, it is. No.
So it was interesting because obviously Kanye West has got some real issues going on right now. And it's interesting because there has been a lot of comparison between him and Britney Spears, but that's a completely separate issue, so I won't dive into that too much. But from what I saw, he had been wearing, was he wearing White Lives Matter t-shirts to one of the fashion shows, which was one of the things. And the other thing was that really damning tweet he wrote about Jewish people. And it was actually really shocking. I think he was then banned from Twitter over it. I think he was kind of taken off several platforms. And I was just really shocked because obviously I know that he has, oh God, what does he have again? He's got a lot of stuff going on, obviously, but I just thought it was really interesting because he's not been cancelled per se, if you know what I mean. Obviously, I know that he has a lot of mental health things going on and everything else, but what he was saying was extremely dreadful hate speech. And I just think that, I don't know, I didn't know enough about it, to be honest, but I was pretty shocked at kind of what I saw originally. And it didn't make a lot of sense to me as to why he was speaking in a derogative manner about Jewish people. But yeah, it was really terrible. But again, it really made the news, didn't it? It was everywhere, the fact that he'd spoken out in this way. It was on BBC front page and everything. So very, very sad to kind of see that in the news, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I thought it was quite funny because I knew we were having this session this Friday, and when that came out, I was tempted to say to Caitlin, I think we need to cancel this, because I just think me talking about me as a Black person going on the Israelite journey, and Kanye West coming out saying the true Israelites are Black people and the real Jews are not, and all this kind of stuff. I thought this was going to be a bit of a problematic thing, but I guess the point I wanted to draw out was around Kanye West, is that it's really interesting when you talk to people about, and I go back to my point about the kind of uncomfortable journey I went on to saying as a Black person, actually, I am connected to the people in the Bible, because there's kind of two camps, I guess, on it. There's a camps that are there's three camps again. There's a camps that are like black people can categorically cannot be connected to the Bible under no extreme, because we see the Jewish people today, they look nothing like the African, all that kind of stuff. There's that piece. Then there's a second camp, which is why I put Kanye West in, which is the militant camp, which is like only black people are Israelites and everyone else is a fake, and all the derogatory stuff that comes with what we saw with Kanye West and the outpour, and then the subsequent kind of cancelling, and he's lost his bank account, and all these kind of things that are happening, right? And then there's this third camp, which I'd like to think that hopefully I'm in, which is like, well, actually, I don't need to kind of, not justification here. I have a validation because I have the DNA and the history, and I can stand and say that actually I am an Israelite and I am black, and that's okay. And as going back to your question, Caitlin, about what can allies do, is to recognize that truth and to be like, not be in the camp of like, it cannot be true under any circumstances because I see Jewish people, they don't look like you, and don't stand in the camp of it can only be this either, but stand in the camp that goes, right, okay, you've done some methodical research on this. Actually, what you're saying makes sense. I can trust you in that truth, and I can walk with you in that truth, and you tell me what the need is, and I'll step into that need, and I'll support you as and where I am. But I just thought it was really interesting seeing that, because when you speak about black and Israelite in the same sentence, a lot of people default to the militant piece, because a lot of the experiences have been of, especially in America, of this kind of militant black movement that's like, we are the people and no one else is. And so when you say it, when you start to talk about it, which is why I tell my kids to be very careful when they talk about it, that is a fear that I carry a lot. I don't know if that makes sense, or if that, and just to kind of think help bring that to life a bit as well.
Definitely, and I'm so glad that you're here today talking about this, and we're all here, listening, and with that happening, and it's in the title, isn't it, to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, and what's happened in the media just highlights how important these conversations are, and that we don't, and we face into them, and we learn, and we move on, and we move forward together. So we're going to open up for Q&A. We have the chat functionality. If anyone wants to pop their hand up, come on camera, share something about what they've learned today, or ask a question, 100% we'll open up for that now.
I'm loving that Viv's son's got a red as well. Loving that. All in red today. Brilliant.
Yeah, we're all rocking red today.
I went and get mine on. I'm so embarrassed.
Nice one, Johnny. Well done. Brilliant. Brilliant.
I wonder if I could ask you, Ugo, are we all just guilty of being too judgmental? We're too busy looking for differences when we should be celebrating our likenesses?
Do you know what? It's really interesting, John. I was in my kids' school today, talking to them about Wear Red Day, and I actually told them to go away, and if there's one thing they do take away, is to recognise difference, because difference is okay. I think sometimes we recognise difference sometimes. I think a lot of the time we recognise difference in a negative way. You're different to me, therefore that's a problem. Mm-hmm. Whereas actually the concept that I think we're trying to say is that actually there is difference. There is a diversity of thought, of race, of whatever it is, right? There is difference. And we can't be ignorant to it, because if you didn't recognise that I am, as a black person standing here telling you that I descend from Israelite heritage versus another black person that isn't telling you that, if you just treated us the same, that's a problem. Yeah, actually, you need to know and understand the difference between me and the person that stood next to me to be able to have the same kind of conversation with yourself. It's the same with me. I can look at you and say, Janet, you've got blonde hair. Amy, you've got blonde hair, and you're both white. Do I deal with you the same? No, because when you speak, you've got a Scottish accent. Amy doesn't. And you see what I mean? And there's these differences that we need to draw out. So I would say completely differences are brilliant. We should always recognize them. What we then do with them is the problem. And you're right, there are lots of similarities between people. It was when I was going on my journey that I saw the similarities between my culture and my faith that I even started to go on this journey. So to recognize the similarities is great as well. But I just don't want anyone to ever feel they need to shy away from differences. Differences are beautiful, and we just need to understand how to operate with them. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And thanks for the blonde hair. It's actually grey, but it's thanks.
I thought you'd like that.
No, I thought when you said about your mum, you're sometimes in different kind of places, I thought she won't actually care whether you're different or not. She'll just love you whatever you are, and there's always that middle ground that you will always find. And I wish you know, you don't have to be related to somebody to actually be able to do that.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Got a little question coming through from Caitlin. I don't know, Caitlin, if you would just want me to ask it. But she's asking the question about what advice would you give on, you know, approaching those difficult conversations when there are different views around religion and faith with your family, because it can be quite topical and it can cause tensions, as you've said.
Yeah, I think for me, get an ally. And my sister. So get an ally is always a good thing. That's not always possible, and it's quite funny actually, because if I think about the journey we've been on as a family, my sister has always been a little bit different in her thinking and her thought process. And interestingly, since Black Lives Matter, I've done a lot of investigation to some of the stuff she said, and I've understood it more now. And actually, me and her are like really aligned with stuff. But she actually went on this journey, not so much to find out she was an Israelite, but just on this kind of journey of asking difficult questions about our faith that we'd all grown up with. And she got quite ostracized for it, unfortunately. And relationships got impaired because of it. So yeah, Caitlin, it is difficult. I think now that there's an ally in it, and I'm there with her, and now my brother as well, and we can have the conversation. I think that makes a big difference. If you have somebody who understands where you're at when you're having a difficult conversation with me, that's great. I know not everyone has that, and I guess there's always this thing you talk about, right? If you put your hand in the fire when you're not expecting it to burn you, it really hurts. But if you put your hand in the fire and you expect it to burn you, it's still going to hurt, but not as much. And it's this kind of angle here is that, do you know what? Some of these conversations had to be had. The reality is that our faith, for those who have faith, is a massive part of who we are as a person. And trying to hide it or trying to skirt around it, it's never really going to work in the long term. So the conversations need to be had. And if you know that, oh, I'm going to put my head above the parapet, I might get a bit of a smack. That's what you're going, but you're going with that knowledge. I said it when Black Lives Matter happened. I said it to people, and you've got people like Sophie on the call. She'd remember me saying that. I said to lots of people, you're going to get this thing wrong about race, talking about black. Can you say black? Do you not say black? BAME, POC, BIPOC, TRIPOC, all these different phrases. You're going to get it wrong, and you're going to put your head above the parapet because you want to do well, and it's going to get a smack, and you're going to be like, why did I do that? But then you got to put it back up again. And you got to keep putting it back up until you get it right. And I think it's the same in here, right? If a conversation needs to be had about something that is so important to you, like your faith, and it's going to cause some issues, you kind of still need to have that conversation. You can be sensible in how you do it. Like I say, if you can get an ally, that's great. But you still need to have that conversation, no matter what. You need to get comfortable with that uncomfortable. Excuse the plug of the series. I hope that helps, Caitlin. I don't know if that answers the question. Okay, cool.
It does. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Caitlin. I don't see any other questions coming through, so I'm just going to nip in if that's okay. So I'm really interested, you and I had a couple of conversations about this, but I'm really interested in when you see different festivals and different celebrations. So if you take Passover, Eid, there's lots of similarities between the different but similar festivals. How would you compare them? And what would you say are the sort of fundamental similarities between them, and why do you think there is? Do you think there was ever a convergence of those festivals and activities, whether that's Christmas, Passover, rolling back the stone, all of that stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've got a couple of answers on it, so I'll try not to babble too long. Draw me back if I get a bit carried off point. I'll probably answer the first part with the last question, which is about the convergence. I think yes. I think so. I'm telling my 3 kids about how to celebrate the Jewish festivals, okay? And for whatever reason in the future, they get split up and they go off their way and they pass on to the next generation and they pass on to the next generation and you'll get to a certain point where what they were taught originally was the same, but where they are or their great grandchildren are has variations, okay? Now, when it comes to things such as, it's really interesting when you look at some of the Christian celebrations, right? Specifically Christmas, maybe not so much Easter because that can vary, but specifically Christmas, it's a fixed date. One of the things that I found really fascinating about some of the Jewish festivals, which I think is the same in some of the Muslim culture and some like Eid and Ramadan, is that it's variable around the new moons. So you could celebrate it 1 year on the 22nd or something, and you can celebrate it next year on the 15th or something, and you celebrate it next year on the 24th or something, and that variation. That's what I found really fascinating, because it has got that whole kind of aspect that says, right, okay, do you know what? This is a movable feast based on the signs in the sky and where they are, where the moon lands, where stuff like that. Now, in the Western world, we don't really follow much of that anymore. We have quite a fixed calendar. We have quite a fixed approach to our weeks are fixed, our days are fixed, stuff like that. And one of the things I found with the festivals is that more fluidity around them, which I find that just quite fascinating personally. But yeah, I do think you could probably trace back everything. There's a reason that these similarities exist, because I think you could trace back everything to convergence. I think over time it moves to a certain state. And I think when you have something that maybe is a bit more global, like Christmas, some of those traditions probably are easier to uphold and stay the same as time goes on. I think that's something I'd say.
Great. Thanks.
Perfect. What I'm going to do is we have spoke about a lot today, and you've shared your journey, and in a short period of time, Ugo very kindly pulled together a timeline of this journey and the kind of key points, and I'm going to bring it up on screen to kind of show you that what we've understood and learned in an hour, how that spanned over time for Ugo. So I'll just bring that up now. Can you all see that okay? Perfect. So Ugo, this is your journey in kind of red Cliff Notes version, isn't it? But I think the kind of key point here, and what really surprised me when I seen it, was that this all started in June of 2020, and we have a dot on the end of the timeline of February of 2022, so almost a 2-year journey with some key points that probably then spurred on another part. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that up for everybody, just to kind of have a wee moment to pause and look at it and see the kind of different parts of the journey and the time that it took to kind of get to where you are now, and not that this is, you know, an end point and a continuation as well to have.
100%, and I think your point around how long it took to get to the, I guess what I'd call the validation point, which is that sort of Feb 2022. Yeah, you know, it can be a bit of a weird journey, because you're going down a journey and people are like, what are you on about? You know, and it's like, and you know, you can just see the links and stuff like that. So to finally get to February 2022 and to have that validation, it makes a big difference. Yeah.
Oh, good. Manisha was just asking, would you share some links to some of the books that you've been reading, and some of the resources and material you've been using on your journey?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I will definitely do that. Yeah.
Perfect. I'll just pause for a final moment for any more questions, and if not, then the embrace@cybg.com mailbox is always open for anyone, if anyone wants to have any other discussions or any questions that they want to ask, maybe after we've reflected on what's been discussed today.
Can I just ask a question? And it may very well be that you've answered it already, Ugo, but do you know, the one thing I hear most from, you know, friends and whatever, I'm saying, I'll use friends kind of loosely, but why Black Lives Matter? Why not all lives matter? And it's a really hard one to, it's a hard one, because we have this ongoing discussion, and I'd be really interested in how you would respond to that.
I think it's a double response. I think the first response is that it was a rallying cry for Black people, and I don't want anyone to come away from this last 2 years thinking that Black Lives Matter did not help Black people. It woke some of them up. It helped some of them unearth the issues that they kind of suppressed and faced into them. It encouraged, and I'll give you it's not an exact stat, but I'll give you a basic stat that the Black pound, as they call it, stays within the Black community less than any other community. So within the Chinese community, the pound and or the yen or the whatever they spend stays in there. within majority white communities, within Muslim communities, within Hindu communities, within the Black community. And I know the Black community spreads across multiple cultures and faith, right? But within the Black community, they are the community that spends the most outside of their own. And actually, so Black Lives Matter was a rallying cry. And you saw more Black people starting to invest in their own, more start to support their own sort of communities and their own sort of businesses and stuff like that. I think the second point, and this is an image that I saw, well, I saw two images, I'll share both of them with you. The first one was around, there's a house that's on fire, right? And there's another house that's a bit messy and a bit untidy. Where's your focus going to be in the here and the now? Is it going to be on the house that needs tidying or the house that's on fire?
Yeah, fire.
And it's that whole concept of like, of course, all lives matter, but one of the lives at the moment is on fire and needs some focus. So actually, yes, you're going to focus there because that's where the need is. And there was an image I saw, it was like two emojis talking to each other. And this was like, well, my house needs cleaning. The guy said, but mine was on fire. It was that whole concept of Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. And it's there. I think the second thing, and I touched on this at the start, and I'll just quickly talk on it. The system that we have today, okay, a big part of the system that we have today was not necessarily set up for the people that live in that system today. And we can keep saying that's not the case, but the reality shows very differently. And if we don't do anything about that, that will always be the scenario. So what Black Lives Matter did for Black people, and there's other movements that will do things for other people as well, right? But what Black Lives Matter did for other people said, look, right, this system isn't working for us. Things need to change. It's like the lopsided tree. You can keep saying, well, you've got the same length of rope as the other person. And I'll be saying to you, yeah, but the tree's lopsided towards the other person. So I might have the same rope. I might have the same opportunities as them, but that tree is lopsided. Okay, I'll give you both a ladder. It's still lopsided. What you need to do is give me a higher ladder or fix the tree. The fixing the tree is going to take longer. So just give me a ladder in the meantime. And then when you fix the tree, I'll get rid of the ladder. And that's the reality of make Black Lives Matter so that all lives do matter. And until it does, you can't say all lives matter because it's just ignorance in the reality that some lives are mattering. That's probably how I'd answer. I don't know if that makes sense.
Good. That's good. I needed that because it's quite a difficult one to have a discussion about, whatever. But I appreciate that focus is absolutely understood. No, thank you for that.
Cool. Thank you.
And Sophie, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Anthony. Hi, Ugo.
Hello.
I mean, Ugo, you know I'm not a religious person and I never have been a religious person, but one thing that I completely understand the value within religion is that religion often forms the basis for moral beliefs and behaviours. And that's where I see it adds value, whatever the religion is. I'm interested in knowing from your point of view, do you think that your moral beliefs and behaviours have changed as a result of the journey that you've been on the last 2 years?
Great question. I'd say yes, in part, but on the most part, no. So if you think about what we talked about with Caitlin before, where I was saying that actually I'm not a Black Jew, I'm still a Christian. So my moral belief and compass is very much still intertwined with Christianity and the beliefs that have always surrounded my faith. That hasn't changed. I guess what has changed is my recognition of parts of the Jewish culture that which again are quite completely intertwined with my Igbo culture, right? But I had maybe not, let's call it, added the extra arrows to my quiver, right? So I had my quiver of arrows. I would maybe say I added a couple of new ones that I had maybe my faith had never said were important, whereas I like thinking they're important. I'll give you a really good example, and just be careful. Just to be clear, this is not me telling people not to do this. Eating pork. I love a pepperoni pizza. I love a chicken and chorizo pizza. I've never liked ham, never really liked it, but I love those things. I love a prawn cocktail. I love all these things, right? Now, in the Jewish culture, and I think it's the same with other cultures as well, so Muslim, Hindu, they're classed as unclean foods. My Christian faith doesn't really ever talk about clean and unclean foods. I now, like I say, I'm learning more about my culture. And that was one of the things that I kind of picked up on, was that was in my culture. It was also in the Bible. And that was one of the things that helped me go, hang on a minute. But seeing those things, I am now starting to the point where I'm actually cleansing my palate of some of those foods that the Bible says is unclean. And when I say the Bible, I mean the cultural side of the Bible that is probably often missed by the Christian faith. So now I'm adding a couple of little quivers like that to my bow. It's not changing my world. It's not changing my viewpoints. I don't judge people. My daughter blooming loves that, and I'm like, oh, I wish she wouldn't, but she does, right? And I'm not judging her for it or making her stop eating it. You know what I mean? But me personally, I'm going on that journey, adding a couple of extra quivers to my bow that I maybe probably for the last nearly 40 years ignored. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Igbo.
Perfect. We're coming up to time, and time is of the essence. So I want to just close by saying thank you, Igbo, for coming on and talking today and sharing your journey with all of us. I hope everybody here has enjoyed it, learned something, taken something away, and will go forth with that. We have this one where we have, like, you know, just tell one person, bring one person to learn more. So I would encourage you all to share with one person what you've learned today, and encourage them to watch the playback and when we post it later on in the Embrace Teams channel, and then that one person might tell another one person, and that's how we'll actively make change. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. It's great to see so many red. Make sure you send all your photos into the Embrace email, and we'll get them put out.
Yeah, thank you guys for listening.
everyone.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Igbo.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.